Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our four-part series on guardianship, and this is part 2 on supported decision-making. I'm really thrilled to welcome Dr. Heather Connor from the Center for Guardianship and Excellence, who will be overseeing and facilitating this event. So we want to thank you for being here. And without further ado, I'm turning this right over to Heather. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be talking to you today about supported decision-making. If you are not familiar with supported decision-making, it's a really new way of looking at decision-making in which the person is able to maintain their autonomy, maintain their decision-making authority, and not have that taken away from the court, and still get support in making decisions. So what we're going to do today is talk about who can have a supported decision-making team, who can be a supporter, and ways to help people who are either young adults or adults kind of later on in life really reach their full potential in their decision-making. So I am excited to offer all of this information for you. I'm going to encourage you to use the chat if you have questions. I'll monitor the chat to make sure that I can answer your questions as we go along. Certainly, if you'd like to speak, you can put your hand up. But I will try to take questions as we go if they're kind of pertinent to what we're talking about. Let me just introduce myself, and then I'm going to turn my camera off after I do that. My name is Heather Connors. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Guardianship Excellence, and we are a small nonprofit that focuses on supporting guardians and people who may need a guardian. And we're also looking at alternatives to guardianship. So we want to make sure guardianship is only used when it absolutely needs to be used. And so we are a research organization. We do a lot of research on guardianship, and then we take our research and put it into training. We do this for family guardians and for professionals in order to really support best practices in guardianship throughout the United States. We are a national organization. We are very fortunate to be almost fully funded. And so almost everything we offer is free of charge. So we do things that are on demand. So if we have an event, you can go back and get the recording, or we have things live, and that gives you an opportunity to ask questions. We have lots of networking events. We have lots of support groups. We have lots of things that are to offer you, and they're free. So I encourage you to check out our website and come see us in some of the programs that we offer you. And like I said, I'm going to turn off my video now because I think it's a little bit distracting while I'm speaking for you to be looking at my face. So let me let you focus on the slides. Hold on just one second. I can figure out how to do this. There we go. All right. So I'm going to start by asking you the question, who of you can think of a time when you needed decisional support? And I bet if you can use the hand raise feature or pop into the chat, I can remember, or anything like that, I bet there's a lot of you here who needed decisional support in some way or another. And I'm going to give an example of myself. So if you know me, I have a 10-year-old child, and if you know me, you have had a conversation with me recently about football. My 10-year-old desperately wants to play football. My husband played football. All he talks about is football. We're a sports family. We talk a lot about sports. And is it safe for a 10-year-old to play flag football? Is it just going to get him to want to play regular football later on? What am I going to do about this? Should I support him? Should I not? I'm asking coaches. I'm asking teams. Coaches. I'm asking parents of children that are playing sports. I'm asking friends and family. I want decisional support in this decision. And that doesn't mean that I don't have the right to make this decision myself. I am an adult. I'm a parent. I have the right to make this decision. But I really appreciate the fact that I can get help from other people in making these decisions. I know you do that too. And that's basically the basis of supported decision making. That's what we're going to keep in mind as we go forward. So for today's topic, we're going to focus on 4 things. First, we'll compare supported decision-making to guardianship and explain why supported decision-making can be a very good choice for so many families, so many adults and their families. Second, we'll talk about identifying good candidates for supported decision-making. Then we'll discuss some clear and powerful steps for building an effective team of supporters. When we talk about building a team, we're really talking about the most important top part of supported decision making. And finally, we'll talk about some common challenges for adults with using supported decision making and how those challenges can be overcome. So I am going to do what we do at the center quite a bit, which is introduce you to a family, introduce you to a person, and talk about their story. Because when we're talking about supported decision making, we're talking about people. And this young woman, Angie, has an intellectual disability, and she is a person who is interested in trying out supported decision making. Angie's a 20-year-old high school graduate. She loves video games, music concerts. She likes scary movies and fashion. She cares a lot about the environment. And she's really into soccer and football players. She had muscular dystrophy diagnosis at the age of 6. She has a lot of strength, so she's an honest person. She's reliable. She's fair. She's kind. She has self-motivation. Lots of emotional intelligence. She really loves creating recipes, and she loves art. But she also has some challenges with reading and math and memory. She has planning and organization challenges, and she has problems controlling her legs. Her mom's name is Alexis. She's 38 years old. She is a skilled advocate for her daughter's needs and wants. She's been doing this since her daughter was young. But she was advised by the high school that she should petition for guardianship for her daughter in order to avoid losing her legal rights to make decisions for Angie and to manage Angie's financial affairs. So if you are a parent of a young person with a developmental or intellectual disability who's either turning 18 or has recently turned 18, you may have had the same conversation with the school. At their IEP meeting, did they start telling you at the age of 16, 17, getting towards 18, you're going to need guardianship of your child? Otherwise, you're going to lose all of your rights. This is important. This is what you need to do. And while guardianship is an effective tool for so many people, it's not a one size fits all. And that's what we're going to learn here. Let's talk about guardianship for just a second to give you some background information. One of the things that, or one of the kind of quotes that I really keep deep in my mind when I do guardianship is that an effective guardian makes decisions that include what is important for the individual, as well as what is important to the individual. So often we focus on what's important for somebody, getting their needs met, making sure that they are clothed and housed and getting their medical care and all of those things. We also have to think about the values. And that's what a good guardian does, is thinks about the person's values and wants and needs. So when we're talking about guardianship, a guardian tends to be a single person. Sometimes it's more than one person. Sometimes it's an agency, but maybe it's two parents, or maybe it's a parent and a child or something like that. They're appointed by the court. They have a specific decree from the court that lays out what their powers are and what limitations there are. So what the guardian can and cannot do, and how long the guardianship should last. So there are sometimes temporary guardianships, there are sometimes, very often, long-term guardianships or permanent guardianships. So it lays out exactly how long the guardianship lasts. There are going to be a real relationship between the guardian and the judge. The judge is the one who puts out the powers in place, and the guardian carries them out. In many states, there is a requirement that the guardian visit the person at least once a month. Sometimes it's quarterly. There are other states like Massachusetts that does not require visits to take place. But best practice is that a guardian visits a person at least once a month. And then there's usually some court oversight, some state oversight. So a report usually has to be submitted either once a year or maybe sometimes quarterly. And that varies by state as well. And I know people here are from all different states. I should have mentioned earlier, I'm not giving legal advice, and I certainly know that you are from different states, so that it does vary state by state. But I will show you just very briefly what the process towards a guardianship looks like. And if you're going to be at other events in the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking about guardianship in more detail. I'm just giving this as a baseline so that we can make a comparison with guardianship and SDM. So whether you're a professional or a family or friend guardian, there's going to be the same process in court. So somebody has to identify that the person may be in need of a guardian. And sometimes that's going to be a hospital, sometimes it's going to be a primary care physician, sometimes it's going to be Department of Developmental Services or Department of Mental Health. And a petition is going to be filed at the court. They're going to have some proof of incapacity. So in Massachusetts, if you're a person with an intellectual or developmental disability, there needs to be a clinical team report. The clinical team report needs to be completed by 3 different professionals, a doctor, a psychologist, and a social worker. And they're all attesting to both the person's strengths and the weaknesses in order to let the court know what areas the person may need help in. The guardian or the potential guardian will be asked to file a bond, which is basically an assurance that they're going to do the right thing. And then if there's any advance directive, that should be filed at the time of the guardianship as well. Notice is given to the person who is potentially in need of a guardian, as well as interested persons. So the person's family, immediate family, parents, children, if there's nobody else, maybe a brother or sister. A hearing is scheduled by the court. In some cases, there needs to be updated proof of incapacity. If that has expired, the clinical team report lasts 90 days. If it hasn't been, if it's been more than 90 days since before the hearing, then there may need to be a new form. And then there's an opportunity in court for the person alleged to need a guardian to speak to the judge. The judge reviews all of the documentation, listens to any testimony, and makes a decision, whether the decision is that the guardian is needed or that no guardian is needed. When the decision is made, there's also a decision whether it's a temporary or a full permanent or long-term guardianship, and whether it's a full or limited guardianship. Even though best practice says that all guardianships should be limited, very often they're made full. All of this is based on a decision of capacity or incapacity. When we're talking about capacity, we're saying that a person has the ability to take in and evaluate information in order to make and communicate informed decisions. All of us adults are assumed to have capacity unless the court decides otherwise. In contrast, we have incapacity, which is really what's being looked at in the court. And this is a legal ruling. And that's based on specific evidence, like we talked about the clinical team report, that shows that there are areas that the person is unable to make decisions. The person has the opportunity to contest at the hearing. The person has the opportunity and should attend the hearing, and should be heard by the court. And then basically the court makes the decision, makes the ruling that the person lacks the ability to understand, evaluate, or communicate information well enough to consent to some or all decisions. And we'll kind of talk this through, like I said, in future events. But basically, this is how the court decides whether a person needs a guardian. So let's get back to Alexis for a second. Alexis told her daughter Angie what she learned, that she learned about capacity, she learned about incapacity. And Angie said, my whole life, my mom has included me in decisions. She taught me that I can do or be anything. Now my school thinks she should get evidence that I am decisionally incapacitated and present that in court to a judge? No way. That's not going to work for us. So let's look for other options. I want to introduce to you the beginnings of supported decision making. And this comes from the Center for Public Representation, which is a disability rights law center that doesn't focus on, but has done a lot of work in supported decision making. And they started a supported decision making initiative, which was one of the first in the country to look at guardianship alternatives for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. People with disabilities may need assistance in making decisions about life arrangements, healthcare, lifestyles, financial matters, but they don't necessarily need a guardian to make those decisions for them. Instead, what they may need is a group of trusted supporters to help answer their questions and discuss their options so they can make their own decisions. Supporters can be anyone the person trusts. They could be family members, coworkers, friends, they could be service providers. It's critically important that the person knows that the supporters know the person, know their preferences, and they're committed to honoring the person's choices and decisions. This has been endorsed by the 2006 United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And it's being used in a number of other countries such as Canada, Sweden, Australia, and Ireland. And we're also seeing it take some foothold in the United States. In fact, here in Massachusetts, there is legislation pending. It's pending for the second legislative cycle in a row, but I think it's doing very well to have a law in place to allow supported decision making legally. Right now, it's much more done informally, but it is done certainly in Massachusetts. So when we think about supported decision making, we're talking about a self-efficacy tool for adults. And when we are defining self-efficacy, we're talking about our belief in our own ability to succeed, which plays a role in how we think, how we act, and how we feel about our place in the world. So, supported decision makers are a group of people who agree to be available to help a person make a decision. These are called the supporters. Very often, the support team consists of 4 to 6 people. It can be more, it can be less. I know of a person who has a support team who has about 12 people who he uses for different purposes. But I also know of support teams that consist of one person. They can include family, friends, caregivers, caseworkers, different people like that. Um, they should be chosen by the adult. So the person, the decision maker, is the one who chooses their team. And it's going to be people that they feel comfortable with, that they trust, that they feel as though respect them. When a question comes up, so in my example, when I talked about deciding whether my son should play football, one or more of the team members is identified, and they talk about the pros and cons, the different considerations, before either a simple or complex decision is made. However, the decision maker is the one to make the decision, the adult, not the supporter. And because of that, the support team has no legal authority or power to choose or enforce decisions. So it is again the supporter who, excuse me, the adult who makes all of the decisions, him or herself. So I want to ask you, um, if you have a child who has a guardianship, if you have a child who you're considering guardianship for, um, can you envision using SDM inside the guardianship? So right now we've kind of talked about them as two different options. There is also what I think is best practice in guardianship, which is including supported decision making within the guardianship. So that means that the person remains the decision maker. They get to really lead the show. And they get to ask other people for suggestions and ask other people, including the guardian, for feedback on decisions that are being made in order to decide whether or not to go forward with the decision. If you're interested in this graphic, we do have a QR code up on the screen, and you're able to pull the QR code in order to keep this graphic. Also, I think all of my slides have been put into a handout for you as well. Okay. So it is important. The reason that we may want to include SDM in guardianship is that it is important to improve a person's self-efficacy and support a person's self-efficacy. And again, self-efficacy is an individual's belief in their capacity to act in ways necessary to reach small or large new or existing goals. Strong senses of self-efficacy can promote human accomplishment and personal well-being. It makes people happy. And I want you to think for a moment about a time when you achieved self-efficacy. So, for example, maybe you really, really wanted to enter that road race. And it was a really hard thing to do because you had never been a runner before, but you wanted to do that 5K with the rest of your family. And so you took small steps and they became bigger steps until you were able to achieve that goal. And think about what that did for your sense of self. Did it make you feel as though, boy, if I can do this, I can do other things too? I think it often does. So when people have high self-efficacy, they often see challenges as something to be mastered rather than defeating. So instead of saying, I'm never going to be able to do, so I can never do that 10K, they may say, well, I did that 5K. It was really hard and I worked really hard to get there, but I think I can do this other thing too. So people have less fear when they have a high sense of self-efficacy. And this is something we should be encouraging with our children and our clients who have disabilities. Finding ways to give them wins or help them find wins in order to improve their self-confidence and help them take risks going forward. Supported decision making was found to be so effective that it has been considered a reasonable accommodation in the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I have a colleague who has a supported decision making team, and he got very sick, and I think he would be certainly okay with me telling this story. He got very sick with cancer during the pandemic. And you'll remember during the pandemic, when you went to the hospital, you were only allowed to go in by yourself into the emergency room. You weren't allowed to bring other people because they were really limiting the number of people in hospitals. And there was a lot of concern that he had, this quick moving cancer. He was going to need treatment, and yet they were afraid he was going to be alone. And so he spoke to his lawyer, his supporter, his mother spoke to their lawyer, and the lawyer said, no. Supported decision making is a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they ended up going to the hospital with the lawyer on speed dial, with the cell phone in hand, ready to kind of pound down the doors in order to get mom in as a supporter. And they were able to do that. And actually, we've seen more and more of this come out of since the pandemic, using SDM as a reasonable accommodation. And so it is a very, very powerful tool for a person with a disability. So before we move on to developing a supported decision-making team, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. I'm going to ask you to use the chat in order to answer these questions with a little true or false. True or false? Supported decision-making uses a team of supporters to help an adult make effective decisions. Is that true or false? Please put it in the chat. I'm seeing some trues. I love it. Good job. True, true, true. All right, let's see what we have next. True or false? The team of supporters is chosen by a medical staff or a guardian after an assessment that the adult has been determined incapacitated. Right. So I'm seeing a bunch of falses. Now, the great thing about supported decision making is, first of all, it doesn't go before the court. So there is no determination of incapacity. The person maintains their decision-making authority, and like all of us, uses other people for support in making decisions. Good job. One more. This is a little bit longer, and you can just give me a couple words. What is the value of self-efficacy? Why is it important? Come on, Heather, I only wanted to put a T or an F in a box. Mental health and independence is Stacy. Thank you. What else do we have? It promotes a responsible feeling in the person and joy in their ability. I love it. Confidence, feeling of being in control, dignity. I love this. This is great. Excellent. So it provides a sense of accomplishment, which helps a person grow or retain the ability to act on their goals. Confidence. For a young person like Angie, these are the skills she needs in order to build a more fulfilling life, a more independent life. So this is something that can also help when a person has a setback. When a person didn't recover as well from a fall, or the person may have had some sort of other loss. Being able to recover from losses is so important. So thank you for answering these questions. I appreciate it. We'll have another opportunity to do that again soon. So let's identify some SDM candidates. And the way we're going to do that is what we at the center call looking for a nod, ANOD. Good candidates for supported decision making have certain qualities that we identify here. And they are in the acronym ANOD. A stands for articulates. To use SDM, an adult must have some method of communicating issues and opinions with supporters. So I'm not saying they need to be able to speak verbally, but if they can use some sort of an electronic board or another communication tool, if they can use a picture book that they can point to, all of these things are ways of articulating. In fact, I had a woman who I was working with, and we were looking at new group homes. And we went to one group home, and she started biting the webbing in between her thumb and her first finger. And I had never seen her do that before. And she was biting it and she seemed very anxious. And I said, I don't think you like this, do you? Do you not, are you comfortable at this place? And she shook her head no. And we went to another place and she didn't do any of those things. And I asked her if she liked it and she shook her head yes. She was not able to verbally articulate, but she was able to explain to me and tell me things in other ways. That articulate part is really important, whether it be verbal or other communication tools, to let the person get their preferences known, their concerns and their values heard, so that the making team understands what it is that they want. The next is N, and N stands for a network. Trusted people are essential to creating an SDM team. These people must have some sort of track record of treating the adult with respect, plus also a track record of making somewhat decent decisions. This may screen out some friends and family if they've been shown to be disrespectful or dismissive, or if their life choices show that they're somewhat unreliable decision makers. You're going to look for family and friends and teachers and caregivers who've proven that they support the adult. If this network doesn't exist, the adult is going to have to work to create a network before having SDM. Next is O, and O stands for overcomes. SDM requires someone to risk making a wrong decision and believe that they can survive making a wrong decision. So you're going to look for evidence that a person has withstood challenges and tried again. Maybe the person wants a job. Like many of us, I'm sure some of you have been in this situation. Like many of us, maybe the person didn't get the first job they applied for. And that's really disappointing. You got really pumped up for that job, and then you got a no, and that's a bummer. But being able to dust yourself off and apply for another job shows that you can overcome adversity. And there are so many examples of that. When something doesn't work out your way and you're still able to move on, that's a really good sign that you're going to be a good candidate for SDM. And finally, D stands for desires. The adults must want some control of their decisions. And this could be of all of their decisions or some of their decisions. And these are the types of decisions that can be made using SDM. So a person who's looking for decisions related to daily living. So they could be small ones. I do want to wear this shirt. I do not want to wear that shirt. I do want to go to the park today. I don't want to go to the grocery store today. Being able to show that they have some interest in making decisions is important. There are people who are very comfortable having somebody else make all of their decisions. And that's a person who may have to be kind of um, cajoled into trying out SDM. I've had clients that I've worked with who I've said, I have been your guardian for a long time now. I think you've really got the handle on your decision making. I think it's time to try SDM. And they'll say, no, you're pretty good at this. I'm all set. And I realized that I'm almost their concierge. I'm almost their secretary, instead of their guardian. And I look for ways to teach decision making and teach self-efficacy and teach the desire to be in charge, and reinforce why that is a really good thing for the person. There's also a QR code if you'd want to download this. Anyone in the person's world can look for a nod. Anyone who spends time with a person can notice the characteristics of articulates, networks, overcomes, and desires. And this could be family members, friends, caseworkers, group home staff, medical professional, caregivers, guardians. All of these people are capable of looking for a nod. So how would you have a conversation? You might say something like, you heard that guardianship was recommended by your school and you were not a fan of the idea, Angie. I found an alternative called supported decision making and I want to talk you through it. Or, I just learned about a process called supported decision making and I think you may want to consider it. Is it okay if I tell you more about it? How about you participate in every decision that's made for you? I can see how much control you already have and that you want. I've learned about a program called SDM. What do you think about taking a look at SDM and learning how it works? And this one, if you're a guardian, may be the other way to do it. I'm happy to continue being your guardian, but part of my role is to help you reach your highest level of independence. I'd like to introduce you to a new process for making good decisions. I think you'll like it. It's called supported decision making. So these are all ways that we can kind of enter into a conversation. And I'll ask you, what are some ways that you as a family member could introduce supported decision making after you noticed a nod? You can put that in the chat or you can raise your hand. I always look for cues that a person is ready to have this conversation. So maybe the person has challenged a decision I was suggesting that we make. If I'm the guardian, if I'm the parent, maybe the person is saying, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it this way. And that'll give me a clue to say, oh boy, you want to be even more involved in your decisions. This is really good news. Let me think about how to support you in doing this. Or maybe you know that the person is already going to this person for advice and that person for advice, and they already have a good group of people around them. And you say, I know you rely on Mrs. Smith for some of your to help you with cooking. And I know that you rely on your uncle to talk to you about dating. These are all really good people that you trust, and I appreciate you having these relationships. I think it might be worthwhile for us to talk about how to use these more. So let's build a team of supporters. When we're building a team of supporters, we're going to start by identifying the aspects of the person's life where decision making may be required. So you'll make a list, and that's going to change as the person grows and the situations arise. I'll show you a few ways to gather some of this information, but I recommend keeping it simple because it will change, like I said. Every subject or potential issue doesn't need to be decided on day one. Otherwise, that list is going to be much too long and much too overwhelming. Next, you'll identify who the adult already knows and trusts to ask for advice about one or more of the decisions that are listed. And matching can be confusing. So we're going to think about some broad topics, and I do encourage you to talk to more than one person for a subject, because it's always good to get a couple of different opinions on different ideas. You'll decide how to ask each person to become a supporter for a specific subject, and that's going to be based on the skills of the adult. So asking can come in different forms, and I'll show you what Angie did in a couple minutes. You are going to copy or design a written agreement and get signatures from each supporter. So depending on your state, it really depends on whether or not you need to have a paper written tool. The Center for Guardianship Excellence, where I work, we do recommend you have a supported decision document, so that you can hand that to banks and doctors and other people, that say, these are my supporters, I am the decision maker, but you may speak to these people about this type of thing. It also is going to be helpful to kind of organize you and help you remember that Mrs. Smith is the person you talk to about recipes and Uncle Joe is the one that you talk to about relationships. It can kind of keep things organized. I will mention in our story, though, Angie has trouble reading and writing, so she did not use a contract. Finally, we're going to train our supporters using a test topic, so that the supporters know what's expected of them. And that's going to be a way to test out their abilities. You'll start by laying out the issue, you'll get the facts, and then you'll talk about the adult's feelings. This addresses both the factual and the emotional components that are typically part of a decision-making process. When you conduct the conversation, you'll make the decision that you want to make, you, the adults, want to make, not necessarily what everybody is telling you to make. So it's important to see whether the other supporters respect you as the decision maker when you're making these decisions. So what happens when you go against the supporters' ideas? Do they yell at you? Do they scream at you? Do they tell you you're stupid? Well, if that's the case, they're probably not going to be a good person for your team. Like I said, there's no one tool. Some states have specific forms that are required. Massachusetts is in the process of developing a form, if the law goes into place. But the ACLU and other resources have good samples out there. So if you go to the ACLU's website, or if you Google ACLU supported decision making, they have a tool that they can use. And specifically, it helps you think about what types of decisions need to be made, who made the choice. Is this a choice that you make alone? Is it a choice you make with somebody else? Is it a choice somebody else makes for you? And think about how you felt about that situation. So it really kind of goes into different thoughts about choices. But there are lots of samples out there. Let's talk about the way Alexis and Angie did it. So you could just make a list of all of the issues that you need help with. But that could be a really long list. So Angie and Alexis decided to make a list of specific things that were Angie's biggest concerns right now. So what's been on Angie's mind recently? Knowing that the list is going to change at some point, but really just kind of focusing on what was going to happen right now. So Angie's list consists of, should I spend money, or how much money should I be saving? Should I go on a group vacation with the church? Should I change my dentist? Should I stay friends with Bonnie or not? Is mom right about makeup? Do I need a job? Is mom right about sports bars? Sports, boys, athletes, and getting strong. So this is the list that Angie has. And what she needs to do is figure out who can help her with this list. So when she started thinking about who could help on each issue, she realized that her cousin Casey is in college studying accounting and business, and he'd be good to help out with spending money and saving money. Her neighbor, Mrs. Dawson, goes to her church and can maybe help with a vacation question about church. She trusts mom the most for making medical advice, so she's going to talk to mom about the dentist. She has a therapist, Dr. Everly. She's been talking to Dr. Everly for years and maybe would be a good person to talk to about being friends with Bonnie. Her friend Farah is a student counselor, and they talk about personal things, so maybe she'd be able to give some advice about makeup. Going back to Casey for the job. Going back to Farah about sports bars. And then dad is the guy that she goes to for talking about sports, boys, strengthening. And even though he lives far, he doesn't live with her. She's able to talk to him on the phone about questions like this, and allows her to get some advice. So she created a vision board. She wanted to be able to see this visually in order to really keep track of things. You'll remember that she doesn't have strong reading and writing skills. So instead she did this. She created a PowerPoint slide with mom's help that laid out who is the main decision maker, and that is her. So Angie's right in the center. And Angie's rules are in the center. Answer my questions, ask me questions, recommend things, and don't be mad if I don't take your advice. So she's going to show all of these people her vision board and ask them if they'd like to participate. Like I said, there are states that have very formal contracts, and those can be used in some situations. Angie was not using a formal contract because she didn't have good reading and writing skills. I will say the strong contracts are ones that have been notarized and signed, and ones that have a release of information form, which also can be attached. Many states have release of information forms, medical release forms, that allow a person to get information. So if you have been told by your school, if you don't become your child's guardian, you'll never be able to get medical information about them, that's not really true. If the child signs a release of information to the doctor to allow you to get information from the doctor, you'll still have that access. So let's look at this a little bit more. The supported decision-making agreement puts out the name and the date. I want to have people I trust to help me make decisions. The people who will help me are called supporters. I can say what kind of help my supporters will give me. If I want supporters to make decisions about money, I will sign a different agreement, which is separate. It gives information about the supporter and then the areas that the supporter is going to help with. And this can be tailored to exactly what Angie has chosen. And I mentioned a moment ago medical release forms. This is Massachusetts authorization to provide medical information. And it can be a very, very powerful tool. You want to see what your state offers. Let's talk about what the training would be like. So I mentioned that she's going to that Angie wants to train her supporters, and she has a template. So what she is going to focus on are the topic, the facts, and her feelings. Her topic is, I would like help deciding if I should change dentists. The facts are, I've been seeing Dr. Gould for 3 years, which is 7 visits. She filled my front tooth and left some rough white gunk, and I had to go back and get it removed. She looks away when I talk. She's weird. I hate going to all dentists. My feelings are she makes me uncomfortable, and I don't think I like her. To turn this into a training, Angie gathered up her prospective supporters into one room. She shared the discussion template, and then she asked the following: what would you advise in this scenario? And if I did just the opposite, what would you say to me afterwards? I think that's the most important question right there. So I'm going to ask you in the chat again, what's the value of having signed supporter agreements and keeping multiple copies available? I will mention as you're typing into the chat, some people keep their most important documents in a safety deposit box. And if you learn nothing else from me, I'm going to tell you, if you have a healthcare proxy document, if you have a living will, if you have a power of attorney, don't put it in your safety deposit box, because in an emergency, nobody can get into that and nobody can find it. So if you have a SDM agreement, same thing. Make it available, make it visible so people can find it when they need it. Why would we want that? Just for the sake of time, I'm going to answer this question, and if answers pop up, I'll read them too. It's important to have them signed so that when you go to places like the bank or the doctor or other organizations, bureaucracies really, there's evidence that you have signed this agreement, that you have this agreement in place, it's been notarized, and that there is the decision maker, the adult is the decision maker. And that way you're going to be much less likely to run into a situation where the hospital says, I don't know if you have capacity, I think we should get a guardian. You'll say, I already have a situation in place, don't you worry about me. And keeping multiple copies, each of the supporters should have a copy, and it should be available to your doctor, it should be available at the bank. All of those people should have a copy, so that everybody knows that it's on what the decision is. So let's talk about using supported decision making in complicated times. This is a very human need. We all need to make decisions. And decisions can be emotional, but they can also be impermanent. They can change. People change their mind. Circumstances change. Things change, which makes the decision different. And I will venture to say that we have all made mistakes. So all of us who are adults have done dumb things in our lives. And whether that dumb thing is you had ice cream for dinner last night, or that dumb thing is something you did in college that you really aren't too proud of, and you know that your parents would be horrified if they found out about it. Whatever that thing is, you probably learned from it. Either you learned this morning when you had a terrible stomachache that a whole pint of ice cream was not the right decision for dinner, or you learn that when you get really drunk and do XYZ, you get expelled from school. Maybe that's another thing you learn. But we learn from our mistakes and they help us grow. So we have to make sure that we give people grace when they're using SDM. We can, I think that we had asked the Perkins team for a couple of different scenarios that might be occurring to some of the participants that are here on the call today. And one of the things that people were talking about was using guardianship to really protect their children. And I will promise you that guardianship doesn't protect people. There are things that guardians can do, which is really about making decisions. And there are a lot of things that guardians can't do, which are really force people to follow those decisions. I had a woman call me one time and say, I need to become my mother's guardian because she's in a nursing home and she's not showering. And I said, well, have you spoken to the staff about her showering? And they said, yes, and mom's refusing. And I said, so if you become the guardian, are you going to make them pick her up and pull her and drag her down into the shower? And she said, no, of course not. I said, then what is guardianship going to do for you that's going to be different than what's going on right now? And I think that's important, is because the guardian doesn't have a magic wand, can't make things happen if the person doesn't want to make them happen. So making decisions is something that the guardian and the supported decision making team can do, but it's not a magic wand, and it's not going to always keep people safe. All right, so let's talk about 6 common challenges that could happen here. Sometimes a person intends to be a supporter, but personal or family things get in the way. In that case, we're going to, there it is, sorry. In that case, we're going to encourage the adult to replace with someone who's who, I'm sorry, replace someone who's unable to participate more than twice. So if somebody keeps flaking on you, it's time to replace them. You're going to pay attention to what supporters say and do. Sarcasm and teasing have no place in these important decision-making conferences. A teasing person may be disempowering to the person who's counting on them for help. Supporters should share their viewpoints in as much detail as the adult will tolerate, then be quiet and acknowledge the reality that the adult is the decision maker. Supporters don't need to persuade. They're not allowed to bully. Nobody has to win the argument. Educate and coach the supporters, and if they cannot behave as needed, then encourage the adult to replace the individual. And that's why a bigger team, not a huge team, but a bigger team can sometimes be helpful when somebody can say, you know, I've noticed that somebody on your team is really not being respectful of your decisions. I'm a little bit concerned about how this is working, and can sort of help the person in a decision that maybe they didn't expect to have to make. When a provider either refuses to include the person in conversations, either intentionally or unintentionally, the supporter deserves to be acknowledged. Ask the provider to please answer the supporter's questions. Have a prepared explanation of the supporter's role in helping make the decisions, and repeat it as politely as often as needed until the provider cooperates. In contrast, which is something that I'm sure some of you people who have family members with disabilities have seen, is when the provider focuses on the supporters as opposed to the adult. And then in that case, have a prepared description of the adult's role as the decision maker. Reinforce that the adult is the decision maker. Ask the provider to explain the answer to the adult's question. Ask the adult to be acknowledged, and remind the person that the person needs to understand and make the final decision. Few of us are able to make medical decisions the first time we learn about a diagnosis. So we're going to use our network to find resources to educate the supporters. We need to be able to have enough information to make a decision in order to help our person in that situation. Parent behavior can derail SDM. We're going to avoid interfering in the process, avoid telling the adult that certain situations are not appropriate for SDM and should remain in the family. There shouldn't be family secrets in this situation. It should be the person having the ability to talk with their team about the issues that come up. And then finally, old habits are not easy to break. Family patterns of power and authority can change because of a smart, gutsy parent decides to break them. So be that parent that decides to break the situation. Be the person who encourages the adult to go to his supporters. Look for situations where you feel strongly about a decision and ignore your impulse to persuade your adult child. Feel free to explain the decision you would make, only if you're one of the supporters, and then remind the adult that he has the freedom of power to make the decision independently with his team. And just for time, I'm going to go past this one and go to our final thoughts. I want you to start becoming conversant in SDM. Understand it well enough to explain it to your family members, to providers, to other people. I'm going to encourage you to look for a nod and encouragement in others. Candidates for SDM deserve the chance to grow in confidence and power. Use one of our job aids that are QR coded over here to help you gain knowledge and power to help someone start to use SDM. Realize that the topics and supporters an adult chooses today are only for today. Change is expected and it's part of growth. Keep copies of supporter agreements in case a provider needs written proof. And train supporters to use the topic, the facts, and my feelings as a discussion template. Then use the template for future supported decision-making discussions. If you're looking for opportunities to learn and grow more about guardianship or supported decision-making or other alternatives, I encourage you to visit training.guardianshipcenter.org, which is our website. We have a lot of opportunities for networking and lots of free training that's available to you. Now I'm going to pass it back on to Anne, who can talk a little bit more about what Perkins has to offer.
Thank you, Heather. That was amazing, and I'm really grateful for the information. I'm sure everyone here is in concert with that. It's such an important topic. So we wanted to thank Heather and her team for putting together our second part of our training, and we'll continue next week. And next week we'll be talking about the rights of adults who have a guardian. So you have been involved in learning about supported decision making today, but maybe you are a guardian and you want to understand how you can foster greater self-determination. So we'll jump into that next week. I wanted to let everyone know that the Transition Center at Perkins has a wonderful offering for people who are needing some consultation and guidance and coaching around transition because it can be daunting. So we have a one-on-one transition counseling model, and you can access that on our website. We also are really excited. We just launched a Facebook group, and in the slides, when you get them, you'll have the link to check in and get to that page. We have a group and a page as well with lots of resources. And here's the information on how to reach us. Again, my name is Ann Phelan. I'm the Manager of Resources and Engagement. And I want to thank my colleague Janine Brennan for putting together this event. And more so, Heather and your team, thank you so very much for being here today.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for making space. Have a great day.